The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war.
Tonight on Politics Now, Russia invades Ukraine, the U.S. response, and the economic ripple effects being felt here. Plus,
I don't think that we cross that threshold of justifying, American troop deployment.
Republican Senate candidate and wounded veteran Sam Brown talks to us about the Russian invasion and his plans, if he's elected, to tackle inflation.
I will always support strong parent participation in making our education system the best it can be.
An off-year State of the State speech. Governor Steve Sisolak lays out his plans to spend nearly $2 billion in federal funding and not raise taxes.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
Thank you for joining us here on Politics Now. I'm John Langland. We start, though, with a history-making nominee. Friday, President Joe Biden announced his selection to fill an open seat on the U.S. Supreme Court. It is federal appeals court judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. She's a Harvard Law School graduate and a former clerk for retiring Justice Stephen Breyer. President Biden had promised to nominate a black woman to that post. Senate Democrats plan to move quickly for a vote ahead of the midterm elections. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell congratulated her on the nomination and then added she was the, quote, favored choice of far-left dark money groups. We'll continue to watch that moving forward, but now to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. After weeks of threats this week, it finally happened, drawing condemnation from the Western world. After the initial invasion, Russia fired roughly 100 missiles at Ukraine's military infrastructure. Highly populated areas targeted as well. President Joe Biden announced new economic sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia.
Meanwhile, NATO says it will activate defense plans to protect its eastern flank. Remember, Ukraine is not in NATO. Around 7,000 additional U.S. troops will deploy to Germany in the coming days. Americans were bracing for the economic impact of Russia's invasion. Stock market tumbled earlier in the week, then recovered as analysts are trying to read the impact on prices here at home. Elise Preston has the painful ripple effects.
Americans woke to the sight of war in Europe as Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, and the shockwaves may be on their way here to the pump, where drivers are already facing the highest prices in years.
Are you concerned that it's going to keep getting worse?
Yeah, it probably will. I wouldn't be surprised if it does.
Russia supplies 10% of the world's oil, and the prospect of disruptions has driven the price over $100 a barrel for the first time since 2014. It's pushing gas prices up past $6 a gallon in Los Angeles County, with the national average already at $3.54 a gallon.
I was shocked to see the prices.
Beyond the pain at the pump, higher gas prices can have a significant impact on the broader economy, translating to less travel, less eating out, and less shopping.
With inflation already at the highest level in decades, the crisis could affect everything from automakers to grocery stores.
We also could see agricultural prices for wheat and corn because Russia and Ukraine are big exporters. And finally, we could see metal prices when we look at iron ore, we look at palladium used in those chips that we need in cars.
The White House is watching, but says larger issues are at stake.
Standing up for our values is not without cost. What we're trying to do is minimize that cost.
Rattled stock investors took a roller coaster ride. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 800 points at the open before rebounding on the upside, as traders contemplate what could be Europe's biggest land war since World War II. Elise Preston, CBS News, New York.
And again, the stock market, a roller coaster ride all week, down earlier, up on Friday. It's been a wild ride. Nevada's congressional delegation all have supported these economic sanctions and all condemned the actions of Russia. One of the Republicans running to challenge Nevada Senator Catherine Cortez Masto is wounded warrior Sam Brown. He was a captain in Afghanistan. This week I spoke with him about Russia's invasion, combating inflation, and schools. We started with what to do in Ukraine.
Americans need to understand that people like me are not about just throwing troops into conflicts without any sort of real justification. And so with Ukraine's having just been invaded now by Russia, this is a case where I don't think that we cross that threshold of justifying American troop deployment. But it's a very complicated situation, and things get muddled, just in short little sound bites or tweets or whatever. The challenges here are that we've got people that sort of assume that Ukraine is part of NATO, and we have obligations to NATO, but those don't extend to the Ukraine.
If you were in the Senate right now, what would you say to your fellow senators, to the White House, to avoid being distracted?
I would say that we would need to keep our eye on China right now, and like I think that Russia's signals, and specifically Putin's, are that the sanctions don't seem to be a deterrence to them, and so it's sort of just this political dog and pony show, but keep your ammo dry. Look to the future. Any sort of deterrence that could have prevented Russia from crossing the border of Ukraine, that moment's already gone. So look to the future and say, what do we need to do to deter China from having a similar action in Taiwan?
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the race for Senate. Obviously, you're not the only Republican running. Adam Laxalt is running as well, and a lot of the Nevada Republican establishment seems to have put their weight behind him, financially at least. What kind of support have you received to try and make sure that you're the person who runs for the Senate from the Republican side?
Yeah, it's interesting that you would kind of couch it as the establishment.
You disagree?
I would sort of disagree in this regard, that Adam has had, by his own FEC accounts, fewer than 600 itemized contributions from Nevadans. Fewer than 600. Think about that. Contrasted to, I've had thousands of Nevadans who've donated to me in this campaign. So this is the true grassroots campaign. This is the campaign for working class Nevadans, for working families, for people who want to see change.
If you're in the Senate, what would you do to start trying to tackle inflation?
Yeah, so inflation is largely contributed by two things. One is congressional spending. Congress just passed this, short-term spending continuing resolution, which, right then and there, like, they've lost accountability to their purpose. It's not like there's a surprise that they should be coming up with a budget and passing it every year. And so the fact that we just continue to have continuing resolutions is a failure in and of itself. But Congress has got to cut spending, because the excessive spending coming out of Congress is leading to inflation. But another contributor to that is the central bank, the Fed, is dumping tons of liquidity into the market, and that's driving up the inflation as well, which is a big word that a lot of politicians use. But what does that mean? It means higher costs in the grocery stores, higher energy costs. It's people having to make tough choices.
You mentioned opposition to critical race theory on your political website. How much of critical race theory do you think is being taught in Nevada right now, and what's an example?
So let's use Washoe County as an example. It's where it's where I live, and I know the school district better. Critical race theory has not been taught on a school district level yet. There were attempts last year to adopt curriculum that included critical race theory, but critical race theory could also be known as something that they call social and emotional learning as well. And so my hope is that we have school districts that are one, much more locally controlled than having a federal influence, but that as long as we're still ranked at 49th in the nation, and at least one of the recent rankings, let's focus on reading, writing, arithmetic.
You can watch our full interview with Captain Sam Brown on 8newsnow.com. Brown's Republican primary challenger for Senate is former Attorney General Adam Laxalt. He was in Florida at Mar-a-Lago doing a fundraiser with former President Donald Trump this week. Laxalt tweeted a picture of him with Mr. Trump, there you see it there, at his club in Palm Beach, Florida. This was on Tuesday. Friday, Laxalt spoke at the CPAC conference in Orlando. Now to the governor's race. A pro-Joe Lombardo super PAC has a new ad out.
In Steve Sisolak's Nevada, criminals are free to walk our streets, and it's harder for police to do their jobs.
Better Nevada PAC made a 6-figure ad buy with the commercial you're seeing right here. Goes on to say Sheriff Lombardo's Nevada is safer and more secure. That's the claim from the ad. Lombardo seen as something of the current frontrunner in the Republican primary race for governor. No legislative session this year, of course. Still, this week, Governor Steve Sisolak held a State of the State speech. He wanted to use Allegiant Stadium as the backdrop. Unfortunately, nobody told Metallica. The band was setting up a stage below the podium where the governor was supposed to be, told all the media to turn the cameras around. Still, the governor's speech carried on, just like his spending plan for the year.
Governor Steve Sisolak is running for re-election, and he hasn't really campaigned yet.
Nevada is on the move.
Today's State of the State had all the signs of a campaign speech with a $1.9 billion check attached.
We're believers. We believe that problems can be solved, that big things can be accomplished.
Governor Sisolak outlined a massive spending proposal.
No new taxes. No new taxes.
Money comes from the federal government's American Rescue Plan. It includes the state's largest investment in affordable housing ever.
The plan boosts housing construction.
Improving education.
I will always support strong parent participation in making our education system the best it can be.
Bumping pay for Nevada State Police.
I will be proposing a salary increase.
Hundreds of millions of dollars will go to roads, paying for a year of free school lunches and boosting small business.
Our government faltered when our residents needed it most during the pandemic.
State Senate Republican leader James Settlemeyer.
Governor Sisolak may think that $6.7 billion from the federal government is enough to fix the state, and he would be wrong.
Still, the governor struck an optimistic tone. He's confident the legislature and voters will follow his lead.
Ultimately, this is about making life better for the people we love.
Most of the governor's proposals have to be approved by the Interim Finance Committee, which is, of course, led by Democrats. Meanwhile, the election, that's 254 days from now. Next on Politics Now, a focus on education. The Secretary of Education is in Las Vegas touring Nevada schools, how he wants to attract more teachers. Plus the new standards for substitute teachers. We'll tell you how Nevada's trying to make sure that classrooms have enough education.
Or try them bacon loaded for $4.50.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Months ago, Clark County School Board members voted to fire, then voted to bring back afterwards, Superintendent Dr. Jesus Jara. Well, now the board is giving him new goals for the upcoming school year. First, improve proficiency in reading for students in grade 3 and math for grades 6 through 8. Second, lessen the number of Black and African American students suspended or expelled. And finally, hire more than 1,600 teachers before November 1st. Superintendent Jara says he is confident CCSD can get those tasks done. U.S. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona was in Las Vegas this week. He visited several schools, including Clark High. Secretary Cardona also announced $800 million in federal funding for CCSD. Christian Cazades reports.
The students were a little freaked out because there was like cameras in our face, but they did well.
Clark High School students spent part of their school day with U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona and Congresswoman Dina Titus.
And what are you working on, the hypothesis?
The visit was to get a first-hand look at how students were handling their return to the classroom after remote learning and a better picture of the importance of extracurricular activities.
Hey, come support football too, come donate.
It's so important now, knowing that the pandemic has robbed students of opportunities to engage with their peers, and develop those skills. So hearing directly from the students how important the funding that goes to our districts is so that these activities continue.
As a group of leaders explored the campus on Arville and Penwood, they dropped in during class time and sat on lectures. Later, they held a discussion with these students about their experience with school activities, but the bigger concern was staffing shortages.
Use the American Rescue Plan funds to incentivize getting educators to stay in the profession, but also let's consider bringing back retired teachers.
Cardona says a long-term solution to get more teachers in the future was already in the works at this high school.
Raise your hand if you're going to be a teacher. First time I walked into a classroom of high school students who are studying to become teachers, led by a teacher that's getting them connected to UNLV.
For now, activities like music are expected to be enhanced by the funding and help bring a sense of normalcy back, teachers say, from the pandemic.
Extracurriculars is a big thing. I hope, budgets stay, maybe even grow.
Christian Cazades Live, Local Now.
The money will be dished out once it actually gets from the federal government to Clark County School District. State education leaders are trying to find a way to make it easier to put substitute teachers in the classroom. Some new rules approved this week will allow those with a high school diploma to apply for a teaching license. All you need is that high school diploma. This would only apply, though, during an emergency declaration, which we're in right now because of the pandemic. Mary Jane Bellieza reports.
Nevada Department of Education wants to make this permanent, but there are concerns about how qualified applicants are with just a high school diploma and limited training.
It's been an ongoing problem even before the pandemic. Not enough teachers and not enough substitutes. Kenny Belknap with the commission, an educator at Liberty High School, says emergency substitute teachers need more training.
I find it troubling, especially with these emergency sub licenses, that we're saying it's okay that someone with a high school equivalent diploma can serve as a long-term sub, someone who can serve in a classroom with 40 plus kids for an entire school year, teaching them the content area that they need under this emergency declaration, and there's no accountability.
The commission has provided accountability recommendations, suggesting subs routinely meet with administrators and undergo an evaluation process. Commissioner Jordan Wenger agrees with this proposal.
I'm just really concerned that these emergency substitutes are being used in our Title I schools more frequently, and those are our kids that need the best instruction. So I want to make sure that this regulation is giving them that accountability of getting the best teachers in there that are qualified.
Currently, there are 600 emergency subs in Clark and Washoe County school districts. These subs will be teaching for the remainder of the school year and next year if Nevada remains under a state of emergency.
I look at the emergency situation right now. It's a temporary thing. It looks like we're doing a long-term fix to a temporary problem. I think a real fix to this is the districts really looking at what they're doing with their subs, providing better pay, incentivizing people to work for them rather than relying on state regulations.
Mary Jane Bellieza, Live Local Now.
The State Commission also approved a motion to meet again in the spring, and they'll discuss extending training for those subs to 8 hours to try and increase teacher accountability. A new audit points out some major problems in Nevada's Department of Corrections. The report made public this week says the DOC paid excessive overtime, inappropriately assigned state-owned vehicles, and overcharged prisoners. Prison Chief Charles Daniels pushed back on the overtime criticism. He says increased workloads leave him without many choices. Some of the excessive charging of prisoners cited were for medical copays and hygiene products like soap and deodorant. Next on Politics Now, trying to slow down inflation. We'll look at a new plan for our ports in the U.S. the Biden administration hopes can solve supply chain issues. Plus, why a proposed gas tax holiday wouldn't actually lower your gas bill at all. This is 8 News Now.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Unanimous ruling by Nevada's Supreme Court will force Southwest Gas to justify its rate hikes to consumers. It comes on the heels of rate hikes that have caused some bills to double. Now, it had been up to regulators and ratepayers to justify why hikes shouldn't be passed along to them. Well, this flips that dynamic. It also upholds a previous ruling requiring utilities to justify hikes to the Public Utilities Commission and ratepayers. A gas tax holiday backed by Nevada's 2 senators turns out won't actually lower your gas costs at all. The idea would eliminate the federal gas tax for a year. However, Nevada actually has a law that says if the federal gas tax is eliminated, the state gas tax just is increased to cover the difference. So when you go to fill up, it's going to cost about the same. Efforts to slow down inflation, meanwhile, they continue. The Transportation Department announced new grants, federal grants, to upgrade our ports. Alexander Limon spoke with the Transportation Secretary about the investments that he says will relieve the pressure.
Hundreds of millions of dollars are set up to upgrade American ports.
To fund improvements from adding capacity to linking rail into our port network, anything that will help goods move more efficiently in this country.
The $450 million in grants come from the bipartisan infrastructure law. And Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg says the upgrades to ports will tackle the supply chain problems caused by the coronavirus pandemic, fix decades of underinvestments, and provide much-needed upgrades to handle modern ships.
Sometimes, even in our biggest ports, a whole new channel has to be dredged to a deeper level, or a bridge has to be replaced because these ships are so big they can't fit under it.
Secretary Buttigieg says these investments are necessary for the U.S. to remain a world leader and ultimately to help lower the prices of goods. But the physical infrastructure upgrades could take years to complete. Buttigieg says that's why the administration is also working on more immediate solutions.
Pushing toward 24/7 operations, setting up things like temporary pop-up container yards to clear some of the containers inland when there's not enough room in the ports themselves.
Buttigieg says another effort to resolve supply chain problems is a push by the administration to produce more things domestically. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Laying out a plan for the country. Next on Politics Now, what President Joe Biden is expected to talk about in next week's State of the Union.
$3333.
Welcome back. Next week in What to Watch, President Joe Biden gives his State of the Union address. The address will be on Wednesday. Of course, we will carry it live right here on Channel 8. The president is expected to certainly talk about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, ongoing inflation, his stalled Build Back Better legislation, voting rights, and climate change. Iowa Republican Governor Kim Reynolds will give the Republican rebuttal, and Minnesota Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib will be giving a rebuttal for the Working Families Party, all coming up this week. We thank you so much for watching us here on Politics Now. All the political news you need, 8newsnow.com. We're back with you on Saturday. Thank you for watching. Take care.